The moment she heard the clunk of the deadbolt sliding home, Sarah felt the day, and everything it demanded, fall away from her shoulders like an impossibly heavy cloak. 32 years old, and already she moved with the heavy, exhausted pace of a woman twice her age. The foyer of the apartment was dark, just the sliver of light from the street lamp fighting its way past the sheer curtains. That faint, dusty gold light was enough because she knew every shadow, every familiar, suffocating angle of this home she shared, yet often felt she inhabited alone. The stillness wasn't peaceful, it was a vacuum. It sucked the noise from her ears and replaced it with a ringing sound, the sound of her own unanswered thoughts. She was still wearing the tailored, professional blazer that felt stiff and unforgiving, a second skin designed to project competence she hadn't felt since noon. Her tired fingers went straight to the silver button, pulling the blazer off, letting it fall carelessly onto the nearest armchair. She didn't care about the wrinkle it would leave, she only cared about removing the uniform. And as the structured cloth slid down her arms, exposing the soft, slightly damp cotton beneath, the real longing began. It started as a low, deep thrum beneath her ribs, a vibration that had nothing to do with the day's stress and everything to do with the void that had taken residence in her life. It was the desire to be touched, yes, but not in a simple, casual way. It was the hunger to be claimed, to have the weariness of her soul seen and then physically devoured by a man who wasn't afraid of her complexity. She closed her eyes, leaning her head back against the cool plaster wall, inhaling the faint, metallic scent of the evening air filtering in. She felt the heavy, painful weight of her own body, a body that felt too solid, too ignored, too invisible. She ached for the weight of another hand, a demanding, warm weight, to remind her that this form she occupied wasn't just a machine for productivity or competence, but something desirable, something worthy of intense, focused attention. The truth was, Sarah was intimately starved. It wasn't just the physical side, though the absence of that was a constant dull drone beneath her consciousness. It was the profound, aching skin hunger, the desperate need for prolonged, non-transactional human contact that spoke of passion and belonging, the kind of touch that melts the armor you didn't even realize you were wearing. She had been going through the motions for months. Work was a distraction, chores were routine, and the few moments of intimacy she and John shared felt more like a scheduled appointment than a wild, consuming fire. They were together, yet they were worlds apart, and the distance between them felt like miles of untouched, frozen landscape. She allowed a brief, shimmering memory to surface, a dangerous luxury she rarely indulged in. It was a fragment from her early 20s, a warm night, a rooftop in the city, the air smelling of rain and asphalt, and her hair, loose and wild, against a man's rough and insistent hand. That brief, fleeting memory of the woman she used to be, the one who laughed loudly, whose hips swayed without self-consciousness, the woman who believed in a fantasy of consuming, boundless passion. That woman was now tucked away like a treasured but impractical vintage dress, beautiful, but gathering dust in the back of the closet. She missed the feeling of being a woman again, not a manager, not a wife, not a daughter-in-law, but simply female, receptive, powerful, vulnerable, and desired. The feeling that your body was not just a container for your stress, but a vessel for deep, resonant pleasure. The reason for this quiet suffering was clear, and it wasn't intentional. John was a good man, a hard-working man, but his absence was an emotional canyon. His work as an engineer took him on month-long, frantic bursts across state lines, leaving her with their quiet apartment and the relentless, suffocating silence. His lack of presence was due to relentless professional pressure, not a lack of love. But absence, even well-intended, becomes a kind of emotional neglect when it's protracted. When he was home, he was exhausted, focused on logistics, not the landscape of her soul. And tonight, The silence felt particularly vicious. She moved through the sitting room, peeling off her restrictive work clothes one by one, desperate to shed the identity that bound her. The sound of the zipper on her pencil skirt being pulled down was a loud zzz, a release of tension. She stepped out of the skirt, letting it pool around her ankles, and then kicked it aside, reveling in the sudden, shocking freedom of her tired, exposed skin. She stood there in the living room, in her expensive, lacy chemise and bra, clothes she had chosen that morning with a flicker of doomed hope that John might be home. The air in the room felt thick, almost sensual, and the silence was so vast, it felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for her to finally, deeply exhale. She felt the ache, that painful, urgent desire to be seen, to be touched, to be utterly validated as an object of desire after months of internal starvation. Before our story truly begins, settle in, and let me know in the comments if you've ever felt a longing like this before, being intimately starved to the point that you just can't wait to be devoured. If you enjoy stories that listen to the quiet moments, be sure to subscribe to Uncut Confessions. Now let's go back to the day the longing was awakened. The moment Sarah kicked the pencil skirt aside, the movement was a release, a small, reckless act of rebellion against the stifling formality of her life. She stood in the deep shadow of the sitting room, bathed in the faint, sensual relief of her bare legs and the delicate lace of her chemise, letting the silence swallow her whole. She was breathing deep, slow breaths, trying to inhale some measure of peace into her starved lungs. But the silence didn't stay silent. Just as she was tilting her head back, finally allowing the tension in her neck to release, a sound that shouldn't have been there sliced through the quiet air. It wasn't the clunk of the deadbolt sliding home, or the familiar mechanical groan of the refrigerator. It was a slight, soft shift, the sound of weight settling, maybe a floorboard groaning under pressure, coming from the far, dark corner near the bookcase. Sarah froze. Every muscle, moments ago relaxed and heavy, snapped taut like a wire pulled tight. Her heart, already fluttering with the exhaustion and the intense focus on her own desire, hammered against her ribs with a sudden, icy panic. She wasn't alone. Before she could process the thought, before she could even summon the grace to whirl around and cover herself, she moved forward, a desperate, blind instinct to reach the safety of the bedroom hall. And that's when it happened. She didn't just see him, she collided with him. A solid, immovable wall of warmth and muscle appeared instantly in the space where she thought there was only shadow. Her exposed forearm hit a dense shoulder, the impact jolting the breath from her body. The delicate strap of her chemise snagged slightly, pulling across her collarbone. A low, involuntary sound, a mix of surprise and a panicked apology, escaped her throat. Her eyes flew open, wide and disbelieving, adjusting instantly to the dark mass standing less than an inch away. It was James. John's younger brother, James, 30 years old and looking every bit the tall, broad, grounded man she always knew him to be. He was standing there, silent and still, wearing a dark, heavy jacket and carrying a worn leather satchel, a piece of John's professional life he must have been dropping off. His visit had a simple, plausible reason, a quick exchange of work documents John needed on the road, but the moment itself was anything but simple. The air between them became electric, charged with the sheer, blinding shock of their collision. James didn't flinch. He didn't make a gasp or make any movement that would indicate surprise or worse, predatory interest. He simply stood there, utterly still, absorbing the shockwave of their collision. Sarah, already raw and vulnerable from her emotional unraveling just moments ago, was instantly engulfed in a wave of mortification so fierce that it felt like a physical heat rising from her bare shoulders. She felt the heavy, painful rush of blood to her cheeks, making them burn in the dim light. She was standing half naked, the lace of her bra, the thin silk of her chemise,
the soft, pale skin of her midriff, all exposed to the intense, unwavering scrutiny of her husband's younger brother. She wanted to vaporize, to sink into the floor and let the earth swallow the shame and the stunning, forbidden heat of the moment. She stammered, trying to find her voice, trying to recall the name of a distant relative or an office detail, anything to put the sterile uniform back on her heart. But James didn't give her the chance. He shifted, but only to pull his hand from his pocket, raising it slowly, carefully, not toward her body, but toward the light switch, flipping it with a soft click. The room was instantly flooded with a warm golden light, the safe, familiar light from the standard lamp near the sofa. And in that relentless, clarifying glow, there was nowhere to hide. His eyes met hers.
The shared breath that James took, inches from her mouth, was a quiet storm. The feeling, the memory he had awakened with that stolen kiss, was a seismic vent. It wasn't the force of the act, but the shocking simplicity of its truth. Her body was humming, resonating with a pulse that was entirely his, entirely forbidden. She didn't move. She couldn't. Her eyes were fixed on the deep pools of his, watching the subtle conflict mirror her own. A fierce determination mixed with a respectful withdrawal. He didn't press for more. He didn't need to. The line had been crossed, the boundaries shattered, and the new landscape was breathtakingly dangerous. But the dizziness, the rush of adrenaline mixed with absolute unadulterated relief, quickly curdled into a cold, immediate spike of terror and profound shame. The relief of feeling desired was instantly overshadowed by the chilling knowledge of who desired her and who she was betraying. John. The name was a silent, accusatory scream in the back of her mind. John, her husband, the man whose brother had just awakened a part of her that John himself had allowed to wither. The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth, far sharper than the faint, minty freshness of James's kiss. She pulled back, this time violently, instinctively. It wasn't a gentle retreat, it was a physical recoil, a desperate effort to rebuild the collapsed wall between them. The movement broke the spell. She scrambled off the bench, feeling the rough wood scrape against her jeans, needing the cold, solid ground beneath her feet to try and anchor herself back to reality. James, ever perceptive, didn't follow. He simply watched her, his expression shifting from intent desire to one of quiet, sorrowful understanding. He knew the cost of that moment the instant he took it. Sarah turned her back to him, facing the chaotic, flashing lights of the arcade sign, letting the noise become a temporary shield against her conscience. She pressed the heels of her hands hard against her temples, trying to physically suppress the wave of guilt and shame that was rising in her throat like gorge. This is wrong. The thought was a relentless, hammering beat. This is wrong. This is wrong. This is wrong. It wasn't a moral judgment whispered by society. It was a fundamental truth of her vows, her life, the safe, predictable box she had chosen. She had just sabotaged the very stability she had complained about. The internal argument was instantaneous and brutal. This is wrong, her conscience shrieked, fueled by years of expectation and propriety. He is your husband's brother. You are jeopardizing everything for a moment of desperate temporary attention. But this is the first time I felt alive. The newly awakened woman inside screamed back, raw and defiant. This is what a woman feels like when she is seen, when she is valued, when she is desired outside the context of duty. This is the essence of life you've been mourning. The war between the two voices was tearing her apart, but it was abruptly, jarringly interrupted. A sudden, sharp electronic noise sliced through the cool night air. The insistent, cheerful chime of her phone. The sound, so mundane, felt like a thunderclap of cosmic judgment. She fumbled for the phone in her jeans pocket, her hands shaking, and stared down the screen. The name glowing on the display instantly froze the blood in her veins. John, husband. He was calling, now at this exact moment, as the residue of his brother's kiss was still tingling on her lips. It was an intrusion so perfectly timed, it felt like an act of betrayal by fate itself. Her heart leapt into a frantic, chaotic rhythm. She risked a quick glance back at James. He had picked up his satchel and was standing, but still maintaining his distance, his face unreadable in the shadows. Waiting. She swiped the answer button, forcing her voice into a tight, strained semblance of normalcy. "Hello? John? Are you all right? It's late." "Hey, honey. Yeah, I'm fine. Just finally checking into the hotel. Just wanted to check on you. Long day?" "Brutal," she managed, her voice feeling alien and tight. She wrapped the hand that held the phone around her elbow, physically trying to hold herself together. The lie of her location felt enormous, suffocating. She was standing outside an arcade, in the dark, miles from her pristine, lonely kitchen, with John's brother, moments after they had shared a forbidden kiss. The irony was suffocating. "Listen," John continued, his tone shifting into the familiar, slightly distracted rhythm of a man focused on logistics. "The main reason I called is, did James manage to swing by and grab those specs? I need to know if I should have the office courier send the backups or if he got them." The casual mention of James, the immediate, undeniable connection of the man standing 10 feet away to the man on the phone felt like a physical punch. It was the concrete proof of the boundary she had just shredded. The bubble of their shared laughter and stolen intimacy burst violently, replaced by the suffocating reality of her married identity. She inhaled sharply, forcing her focus onto the logistical lie. Yes, James came by. He grabbed the files. They're safe with him, John." "Perfect. Good man. Tell him thanks for the last-minute run." "Okay, well, get some rest, Sarah. I'll call you in the morning, all right? Love you." "Love you too." She choked out, the words tasting hollow and utterly false in her mouth. She ended the call quickly, pulling the phone away from her ear as if it were contaminated. The guilt hit her in a massive, dizzying wave. The shame was total. It wasn't just the kiss, it was the lie, the tight, strained voice she had used, the way she had reduced John to a convenient excuse for James's presence. She felt utterly corrupted. She turned to face James, her chest heaving, the beautiful rush of adrenaline now a sickening nausea. The woman who had shrieked with laughter only minutes ago was gone, replaced by a shell of anxious, conflicted, tense propriety. "I have to go," she whispered, her voice barely audible, raw with self-condemnation. She took 2 steps back toward his car, then stopped, her hands twisting nervously in the fabric of her sweater. James stepped forward, slowly, respectfully. "Sarah, look at me." She shook her head, unable to meet his gaze, unable to face the man who had just illuminated her darkness, only to plunge her into a deeper one. "You need to leave. I need you to just go. I shouldn't have come out. We shouldn't have talked about anything. You need to forget this happened." The cruelest thing James did was not to argue, not to defend himself, and certainly not to push. He simply stood there, his dark eyes fixed on her retreating posture, his silence, a heavier judgment than any accusation he could have hurled. "You don't have to do this, Sarah," he said, his voice soft, but laced with a profound, almost devastating sadness. "You don't have to punish yourself for feeling something real." "Yes, I do," she snapped, a frantic edge of hysteria in her tone. "I'm married, James, to your brother. This is wrong. It is immoral. It is a line I should never have crossed, and I am putting it back." She punctuated the last word with a sharp, decisive gesture, as if slamming an invisible door shut between them. She looked at him then, briefly, meeting his gaze. His eyes held the clear, quiet understanding of her pain, but they also held the sadness of knowing that the vibrant, desperate woman he had kissed was now ruthlessly suppressed by guilt.
And that quiet sorrow, the knowledge that he wasn't disappointed in her, but disappointed that she was choosing to retreat from her own happiness, made her retreat even harder, making her self-punishment feel more necessary and justified. It was the ultimate conflict, the pole of the man who saw her versus the pole of the life that defined her. And in that desolate moment under the flashing lights, shame won. She turned, walking away from the bench, from James, from the remnants of the stolen kiss, into the isolating solitude of her conscience. She had to end it. It was the only way to save the fragile structure of her life, even if the foundation was now cracked.
John's eyes scanned the paper, a roadmap of accusations and demands laid bare in the heart of the life he thought he owned. His face, seconds ago slack with travel exhaustion, tightened, first in confusion, then in a cold, deep, uncomprehending shock. He didn't get angry. Anger would have been easier. He went silent. His mind, accustomed only to processing logic and profit margins, simply stalling at the raw, volatile content. Provence. Not negotiable. Stop being polite. Start being a man who is afraid to lose me. He didn't need to read the full 3 pages. The title of the 3rd section, The Intimacy We Deserve, was enough. It was the crack in the foundation. The evidence that the beautiful, predictable structure he had worked so hard to maintain had been silently rotting beneath a perfect facade. He looked up, his gaze finding Sarah, planted by the doorway, her arms crossed, her body utterly still. He saw that the ghost was gone. In her place stood a woman armed with a terrifying, unflinching, quiet resolve. He opened his mouth, the analytical part of his brain trying to formulate a response, a defense, a question about the budget for Provence, a logistical counterargument. Sarah, is this about the trip? We talked about budgeting next quarter, and honestly, the market stability. He didn't get to finish the sentence. The sheer, overwhelming inadequacy of his response, the immediate retreat to numbers and schedules when confronted with the desperation of her soul, was the final, detonating trigger. Sarah moved, not with rage, but with a terrifying, singular focus. This was not a conversation. This was the claiming. She launched herself across the threshold, covering the distance between the doorway and the bed in 2 swift, powerful strides. Her hands, fueled by the memory of the fire James had ignited, shot out and grabbed the front of John's expensive white dress shirt, which he still held open at the chest. "Stop talking," she commanded, her voice a low, raw gasp, utterly foreign to his ears. It was a command, sensual and brutal, demanding presence, demanding focus. She didn't wait for him to drop the paper. She didn't wait for him to speak. She pulled him violently toward her, crushing the crisp stationery in the process. The list, her manifesto of survival, fell to the floor, forgotten, rendered immediately irrelevant by the intensity of the moment. The demand for spontaneous, messy, and urgent intimacy had superseded the need for verbal argument. Her mouth found his with an urgent, consuming desperation he had not felt in 7 years of marriage. This wasn't the sweet, familiar kiss of reunion. This was a hungry, aggressive takeover. Her lips were firm, demanding, her teeth grazing his lower lip in a possessive, almost feral action. The taste was familiar, his, but the intensity was the ghost of another man, another moment, another life. She was pouring the entirety of the night with James, the raw, validated hunger, into this kiss with her husband. John, utterly blindsided, stumbled back, his spine hitting the cool, hard plaster wall above the bed. He was confused, his analytical brain scrambling for context, yet his body, starved of this chaotic, consuming desire for far longer than Sarah's, reacted instinctively. The shock melted into a sharp, painful jolt of pure lust and astonishment. She didn't give him a chance to breathe, much less think. Her hands, still gripping his shirt, tore the remaining buttons with a savage, reckless efficiency, scattering plastic shrapnel across the duvet. She pushed the shredded fabric off his broad shoulders, her fingers digging into the muscle and skin of his neck, forcing his mouth back to hers. "I need you to look at me," she breathed against his mouth, her voice vibrating with a dangerous combination of desire and desperate fear. "I need you to show me that you're afraid to lose me." Her clothes, the soft, comfortable uniform of her waiting, became instantly restrictive. She reached for the hem of her sweater and ripped it off, the fabric catching the collar of his destroyed shirt. She tossed both to the floor, standing before him in her lace camisole, her chest heaving, the frantic rhythm of her heart mirroring his own. The scene was immediate, sexual, and utterly devoid of the politeness that had plagued their intimacy for years. John was still processing the raw, demanding content of the letter, but Sarah had bypassed his mind entirely and gone straight for his senses. She was demanding a physical, undeniable proof of his need, the kind of primal connection that existed outside of spreadsheets and construction deadlines. His hands, finally released from the inertia of shock, went instantly to her body, no longer offering gentle caresses, but demanding to feel the reality of her presence. The touch was rougher, more insistent than she remembered, fueled by a mixture of residual travel stress, utter confusion, and the intoxicating, unfamiliar aggression of her wife. He didn't lift her gently, he gripped her hips, pulling her roughly against the undeniable proof of his immediate desire, grinding her against the familiar, expensive fabric of his trousers. The friction was a white-hot strike, causing Sarah to gasp, a sound that was half pain, half raw pleasure. Her legs wrapped instantly around his waist, clinging to him with the ferocity she had promised James. This was not a scheduled appointment, it was a desperate, messy, urgent collision. As John maneuvered her onto the bed, their movements clumsy and rushed, Sarah closed her eyes. The emotional resonance of the act was deafening. The sensual overload of his familiar skin, his muscled arms gripping her thighs, the scent of travel and expensive cologne, it all collided with the ghost of the man who had taught her to want this. Was this John she was experiencing, or the man James told her she deserved? The line was terrifyingly blurred. She drove the encounter, demanding the intensity, the noise, the mess that her old life had lacked. She used the lessons of her forbidden night, the raw honesty, the complete lack of shame, the sheer vocal expression of pleasure, and she poured it all into her husband. She needed him to be consumed by her, to forget his work, his stress, his absence. She needed him to claim her so violently that the memory of the night before was either obliterated or integrated. His response, initially fueled by confusion, quickly became an animalistic, deep-seated passion he clearly had suppressed beneath layers of duty and exhaustion. He entered her with a demanding force that finally shook the final fragments of her composure. The sensation was overwhelming, shattering her reserve, forcing a long, ragged cry from her throat, a sound she had not realized her body was capable of producing. It was sexual, primal and deeply, intensely intimate. It wasn't love they were making, it was validation. It was a desperate physical argument for the survival of their connection. Every demanding thrust, every urgent breath was Sarah screaming the demands of her manifesto. Look at me. Be present. Be afraid to lose me. John's eyes, when he finally opened them during a moment of desperate, frenzied movement, were no longer analytical. They were wild, shocked, and intensely focused, seeing her, the woman on fire, the woman demanding life for the first time in years. In that moment of complete physical surrender, the ghost of James was momentarily banished, replaced by the chaotic, terrifying, and fully present reality of her husband. The climax was a mutual, devastating release, a seismic jolt that left them both breathless and trembling, the air thick with sweat, destroyed fabric, and the volatile scent of spent passion. They collapsed, limbs entangled, John's heavy, exhausted weight pressing her into the duvet. The silence that followed was not the cold, suffocating silence of the apartment before, but the raw, depleted exhaustion following a violent, necessary storm. Sarah felt profoundly depleted, yet every cell in her body sung with a terrifying new awareness. The ghost was well and truly exorcised, replaced by the visceral, aching woman who had just fought for her life. John was the first to move, pulling back slightly, his eyes still wide, fixed on her face as if seeing her true features for the first time. He didn't speak of the moment they shared. His gaze fell instantly to the ruined papers scattered by the bedside, the physical debris of her demands. He rolled off her, the sudden coolness of the air amplifying the heat of their contact. He reached for the crumpled stationery, his hands trembling slightly no longer from exhaustion, but from the terrifying realization of the document's true gravity. He read the fragments he had missed, the words on "the things we must speak," burning into his consciousness. Stop being the provider, start being the man I need. I need to see your exhaustion, not just your profit margin.